Hi, everyone. If you look around our world, you may notice that there are times when one color particularly stands out. It is everywhere, and that is because people love it. The color blue is so rich and has so many tints and shades. We have midnight blue, navy blue, powder blue, cerulean, periwinkle. It's even embedded in our speech. Blue bloods, blue moon. Blue collar jobs. People sing the blues and go off into the wild blue yonder. Art can be a way to access something that is nonverbal within ourselves, and color has a special way of evoking a mood or feeling or sensibility that it seems to speak its own language. So, we're going to talk today about the history of the color blue in art and one of its stewards, Yves Klein. The color blue has its own biography. The story of blue is the story of people seeing something beautiful in the world that they could not figure out how to recreate. You can use soil to make brown and grind up green leaves and get green, but you can't take the blue out of the sky or the ocean. There isn't any blue in Paleolithic cave paintings. There wasn't even really a word for it in ancient Western cultures. Homer described the sea in his writings as wine red. And then, more than 6,000 years ago, in a mountain range in Afghanistan, they started mining a dark blue gemstone that would change everything, called lapis lazuli. Here's a picture of the stone. Egyptians called lapis lazuli the sky stone and used it to make offerings to the gods. On his death mask, King Tut's eyebrows are made of lapis lazuli stones. Eventually, the stone made its way to Europe. When it reached Venice, artists went to great lengths to extract the vibrant blue pigment from the stone because no one had seen a color like this before. It was incredibly difficult. First, they mixed the crushed stone with melted wax and resins, turning it into a paste. They would knead it, let it rest for a few days, heat it, knead it some more, and then knead it again. All of this work for only a tiny bit of very blue powder, the first true blue. They called it ultramarine, meaning beyond the sea. It was worth more than gold, used only to depict the most precious things, objects of devotion. To paint the Virgin Mary's robes. Up until that point, we might have seen the Virgin Mary in browns and reds and other colors, but beginning in the 12th century, we almost always see her in blue. This true blue ultramarine pigment was so expensive that Michelangelo couldn't afford it, and Vermeer drove his family into debt because he couldn't stop using it. So in 1947, an artist named Yves Klein sought to copy the blue he saw in the sky on a clear blue day. But like all the artists before him, he found it wasn't going to be easy. He loved the pigment and thought it looked perfect as a powder. But to make it into a paint, he had to mix it with a binder, something that would allow it to spread and stick. When he mixed his pigment with the usual binders, it looked darker, flatter, and just not good enough. He wrote, "The magic of the color vanished. Each grain seemed to have been extinguished individually." He was at a loss. And then finally, he found a man in Paris who could help. One of the most famous color makers, the man who'd made Picasso's blues. They started working together, and if what was available didn't let Yves create the blue he saw in the sky that day, they'd make new materials. They enlisted the help of chemists, and after years of experimenting, they did it. They found that using a particular type of solvent, Yves could keep the brilliance and the light that is inside the color. They suspended the pigment in a perfectly clear synthetic binder, which they called only the medium. The result didn't look like paint. Yves described it as pure energy, and he called it YKB, Yves Klein Blue. The reason why he called it just the medium is because he kept his process very secretive. He really kind of wanted to keep this blue to himself for as long as he could. Eventually, he would patent it, and it became known as International Klein Blue. But during his lifetime, Yves Klein used this paint almost exclusively to paint anything and everything. He started painting large canvases of only blue, his blue. He put a lot of effort into making each one look identical. He coated them with a kind of milk and then carefully applied the paint as evenly as he could. He even used rollers to prevent the distraction of a brushstroke. He called the rectangular blue canvases windows. For his first show of the blue paintings, he hung 11 identical canvases in a gallery in Milan. They were all different prices. He sold 3 of them. When the show moved to Paris, he convinced the postal service to allow him to use an all-blue stamp that he had created for the invitations. The New York Times called it obsessional art. He released 1,001 blue balloons into the sky above Paris. He even covered replicas of some of the most famous sculptures in Western art with blue, even the Venus de Milo. He painted globes and maps blue so that you couldn't see any difference between land and water or the borders between countries. He said he wanted to start a blue revolution, and he wrote letters to Eisenhower and Fidel Castro asking them to join. One critic wrote that Yves Klein's blue had an immense, almost unbearable quiet, and that its grandeur is one of absence, the blue of outer space. Famously, Yves Klein argued that the whole history of art came down to a war between line and color, and that so far, line had won the battle. He was on the side of color. To Yves Klein, blue represented freedom, peace, infinity, and the presence of God. While living in Paris, Yves Klein had a series of heart attacks and died at age 34, having changed the art world forever through his relentless pursuit of the perfect depiction of a singular color. His blue art hangs in museums around the world. This piece here is from a series called Anthropometry, where he painted International Klein Blue on the bodies of live models and had them press their bodies against paper or lay down on a canvas and move around to create these very natural looking swoops and curves. So there we have a short history of the color blue in art, the preciousness of the pigments themselves and why they were so revered and sought after. And we have Yves Klein, who spent his entire working career trying to find the perfect shade of blue to share. And I think you'll agree that it is lovely and vibrant and deep and rich and kind of that quintessential blue that we think of when we think of the color. I hope you all have a great day and get to enjoy some more art.